All right, I just did a flash poll, and 30 of you voted. I asked the question, should I do a video on the Brett McCracken article on 4 reasons you should wear a mask to stem the tide of COVID-19? 58% of you said yes, and 27% of you said, I don't care what you do. So I'm going to take that as an overwhelming majority wanted me to do this video. If you want to participate in such polls, follow me on Twitter, RealADRobles, at RealADRobles. All right, so here's the article. 4 reasons to wear a mask even if you hate it. July 1st by Brett McCracken. Now, I'm not going to read the whole article, but I'm going to just talk about each of his 4 reasons point by point. And he starts off the article by saying he doesn't like wearing face masks. And, while that's true, I don't like wearing face masks either. I think that's kind of a weird place to start because my opposition to wearing face masks, unless I'm required to, is not because it's uncomfortable, though I do find it uncomfortable. Because if it was like the Black Death, like it was initially predicted to be, like everyone's going to die, and I have asthma, so if you get it, you're going to die, that kind of thing, I would wear the mask as uncomfortable as it is, and I wouldn't even complain about it. I wouldn't even think twice about it because I have I think I'm reasonable. I have a good head on my shoulders, so I wouldn't want to put myself at unnecessary risk. And so it's not really about not liking the mask, although I don't like it. It's really more about other things. And so let's read the article, because the idea here is that he realizes that masks have become political, and he's kind of lamenting that. I don't really care about this. I know people really don't like when things become politicized. I don't mind things being politicized because the gospel is a political message. When you say Christ is king, what could be more political than saying Christ is king? The King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. He's my master. I listen to him more than I listen to anybody else. Like, that's super political. So yeah, everything should be politicized. But what he's saying here is that we should rise above the political partisanship. Fair enough. I don't think the gospel is a partisan message necessarily, though it is political. And he says that there are 4 biblical reasons to wear a mask. And so when somebody says that they've got a biblical reason to wear a mask, that they're trying to say that if you don't wear a mask, you're sinning. That's essentially what they're saying on a low-key way. And I don't really think that's necessarily the way we should go with this. I think it should be left up to the individual what to do. That being said, I've got 4 gospel reasons not to wear a mask. You see, a gospel reason is like a biblical reason, except better, because it's gospel. It's a gospel reason. So here's my 4 gospel reasons to not wear a mask in response to Brett McCracken's inferior 4 biblical reasons to wear a mask. Number 1, to love your neighbor. Matthew 22:39. Here's what he says. I'm frustrated that the science on masks during COVID-19 has been inconsistent. It's maddening that everyone from U.S. Surgeon General to the CDC and the WHO have flip-flopped on their mask guidance. But it's not surprising. This is a brand new virus and a fast-moving crisis. We probably won't know for years what was right and wrong in our efforts to stop COVID-19, but consensus is emerging that wearing masks does slow this virus's spread and thus can save lives. I'm laughing because he's basically saying, I lament the lack of consensus, but there is a consensus. So it's just like when he gives away with one hand, he takes away with the other. I really find that annoying, but whatever, let's move on. I'm trying not to get too much in the weeds here. Here's his biblical reason. I'm going to counter with my gospel reason. For Christians called to love neighbors as ourselves, wearing masks in public, particularly indoor spaces where social distance cannot be guaranteed, seems like a relatively easy way to practice neighbor love. Even if it's annoying to wear one, and even if you're not convinced by the science behind it, why not wear one anyway? Given the enduring uncertainty about the way COVID-19 spread, shouldn't we err on the side of more protective measures rather than less? For the sake of neighbor, we might, even if it's a slim chance unknowingly. For the sake of the neighbor, we might, even if it's a slim chance, unknowingly infect. Well, here's the problem. I will counter your biblical reason to wear a mask with my gospel, trademark, reason to not wear a mask, because we should love our neighbor as ourselves. And we shouldn't be disregarding the panic and the fear and the anxiety that everyone walking around like this is spreading, because the reality is that the longer everyone walks around like this in fear-stricken panic, the longer the lockdowns will also last. And so We've already seen the detrimental effect on mental health the lockdowns have had, on the economy that the lockdowns have had, and all this stuff. We've seen the detrimental impact of paralyzing fear that it's had on our economy and our neighbor. I mean, people have died because of this paralyzing fear. We were sold a bill of goods that this was the worst thing since the bubonic plague. It's not the worst thing since the bubonic plague. And so my gospel reason for not wearing the mask is you should love your neighbor. You should love your neighbor as yourself in such a way that you don't push forward the panic. You don't keep people in a state of fear and anxiety, because the fear and anxiety is causing us to make poor decisions and is costing lives. And so I think that's a really good way to practice neighbor love, to leave the wearing of the mask up to each person's own decision. That's what I think. All right, here's Brett McCracken's second biblical reason to wear a mask, and I will counter it with my second gospel reason not to wear a mask. He says, to respect authorities, Romans 13. It's easy to blame leaders these days, and certainly many are making lots of mistakes, but let's show them grace. COVID-19 is just one of the several complex and fast-evolving issues authorities everywhere are facing. Instead of rushing to criticize leaders, what if we gave them the benefit of the doubt, honoring and respecting their authority and believing they are working hard and trying their best? Further, it seems clear from Romans 13, among other such passages such as Titus 3 or 1 Peter 2, that Christians ought to respect the human governments to which they are subject, as long as submission to those governments doesn't contradict our submission to the lordship of Christ and his ultimate authority. When it comes to mask wearing for Christians, then, if your city or state is mandating masks in certain circumstances right now, as mine is, shouldn't you obey those directives? Likewise, if your church has instituted a mandatory mask policy for physical gatherings, go ahead and wear that mask happily, embracing the opportunity to practice Hebrews 13. Now, here's my gospel counter to your biblical reasoning. You see, gospel is better. See, gospel means it's like biblical, but it's better. It's gospel. Here's my gospel reason to not wear a mask, because you should respect Romans 13. You see, Romans 13 tells you to be subject to the civil governing authorities because they're put there for your good. You see, they're put there to punish evil and to promote what is good. And in the United States of America, our civil governing authority, there are certain layers to it. You know, we've got city governments, we've got, family governments, we've got state governments, we've got federal governments, and there's different layers to those things. But ultimately, our civil governing authority is a written document. It's the Constitution of the United States of America, which specifically says any power that's not given to the federal government is given either to the states or to the individual. And depending on what state you live, there are certain powers that are given to that state. And I'm pretty sure demanding that you wear a piece of cloth on your face is not one of those powers. And so we should respect Romans 13 and let every person decide for themselves what to do in their particular context. You see, everyone's context is different. Some people have, contexts where it makes sense to wear the mask, and other people have contexts where it might not make sense to wear the mask. And we're all managing our risk differently. And there's no one better to manage our risk better than ourselves and our family units. And so I would say that the good reason to not wear a mask is to respect authority and let everyone remember that they should respect authority and they should be subject to the civil governing authorities. In other words, the Constitution of the United States of America. So that's my gospel reason why you shouldn't wear a mask if you don't want to. But if you do want to wear a mask, you should wear a mask. Nothing wrong with that. Anyway, let's continue. Here is Brett McCracken's third biblical reason to wear a mask. He says to honor the weak in our midst, which is from Romans 14. He says, mask wearing has sadly become divisive in churches where masks are not mandatory. Some churchgoers will wear them, some won't. Predictably, the groups will start assuming the worst about each other. The mask avoiders are reckless and see themselves as stronger and braver, and that the mask wearers are cowardly and fear-stricken, needing a nudge in the direction of risk. In Romans 14 and 1 Corinthians 8 and 10, Paul argues that in matters of freedom, it's important that stronger Christians don't flaunt their freedom in ways that become stumbling blocks to the weak. When a mask-wearing weaker brother enters a church gathering full of masks-free stronger brothers, the mask wearer naturally feels pressure to remove it. But that's exactly the sort of wounding of the weak conscience that Paul says is a, quote, sin against Christ. Now, I'm going to counter this, Brett McCracken, with my gospel reason not to wear a mask. You see, gospel reasons are like biblical reasons, only better. Here's what we should do. We should actually honor the weak in our midst, according to Romans 14. You see, because when a non-mask-wearing weaker brother enters a church gathering full of mask-wearing stronger brothers, the non-mask-wearing weaker brother naturally feels pressure to remove it. But that's exactly the sort of wounding of the weak conscience that Paul says is, quote, a sin against Christ. You see, the non-mask wearers are definitely in the minority, and I would argue fit the category of weaker brother a lot more straightforwardly than what you're trying to do here. You see, the weaker brother, stronger brother thing is an area where people engage in all kinds of shenanigans to, get their point across, like try to trick people into agreeing with them. And I'm not going to fall for that because honestly, in this case, I think that this actually fits the mask wearer, the non-mask wearers better. It'd be very difficult to argue against that, at least in my opinion. So my third gospel reason, remember, the gospel reasons are like biblical reasons, only better, is we should honor the weak in our midst. Now, the other thing about this one, Brett McCracken, that I wanted to bring up is it actually kind of goes against your second point, respecting authorities, because it's either freedom or isn't. Like, you're telling us here that we should, churches are making masks mandatory, but then here you're saying it's a freedom. So if it's a freedom, then churches shouldn't be making masks mandatory. In fact, that's my position. Nobody should be making masks mandatory. I think that if you want to wear a mask, there's nothing wrong with you. I think that everyone has certain contexts where it might make sense to wear a mask. Like if you have diabetes or something, or if you're elderly, yeah, you probably should wear a mask. I mean, you're the ones that are at risk here. But if you're like 14 years old, you probably shouldn't wear a mask because like hardly ever do you get COVID in any serious way. So it's like, I'm looking for freedom here. I agree actually that it is a freedom, but Brett McCracken, these points are kind of weird because you're saying like your church is making it mandatory to attend worship to wear a mask, but then over here you're saying it's a freedom. Well, which is it? Is it mandatory or is it freedom? I don't know, but I'll let Brett McCracken figure that out. Here's Brett McCracken's fourth biblical reason to wear a mask, which I will counter with my fourth gospel reason to wear a mask. You see, gospel reasons are like biblical reasons, only better. Here's what he says. He says to use freedom for the sake of the gospel. 1 Corinthians 9:19. He says, American Christians are sometimes prone to understanding freedom in a way much more shaped by the U.S. Constitution rather than by the Bible. But it's not a knock on the beauty and legitimacy of man-made freedoms to suggest that Scripture sometimes calls us to give up those freedoms for the sake of the gospel. Paul, for example, seems happy to give up his freedom for the sake of loving others, for though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. He writes, to the weak I will become weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in its blessings. End quote. There is such a missional power in this posture. Few things are more beautiful to witness than someone giving up their rights and freedom for the sake of another. Now, let me counter this, Brett McCracken, with my gospel reason that you should not wear a mask. Remember, gospel reasons are like biblical reasons, only one better. It's like one better. I'm such an idiot. Anyway, here's my fourth reason, gospel reason, I should say. Because we should use our not wearing a mask for the sake of the gospel, our freedom for the sake of the gospel. Because I think that, we should be all things to all people, including strong and fearless and not afraid to die. That's something we should be for all people. To all things, we should be all people. And I think that gathering for worship, even though there's a pandemic going on, and laying hands on the sick and worshiping the Lord of glory who gave us life without fear, without anxiety, without any of this stuff, for those of us who are not at risk, I have asthma. I know I'm in a risk category. I get it. But if I were to get, COVID-19, I'd probably be okay. I'm not scared to die. So I don't think we should be ruining everyone else's life, shutting down economies, making it so you can't visit elderly, canceling surgical procedures and things like that because everyone's losing their mind over COVID-19. No! We shouldn't fear death. We should love our neighbor as ourselves. We should consider the weaker brothers. We should use our freedom and our lack of fear because though we die, yet shall we live for the sake of the gospel. Remember, these are 4 gospel reasons why we should not wear a mask. Remember, gospel reasons. They're like biblical reasons, only better. Now, listen, I'm serious about my reasoning in many of these situations. I think that it all is valid. However, I'm just giving you my opinion. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to pretend like you have to do things exactly the way I do them to be biblical. And that's why the only option here that is reasonable, that makes sense, that allows everyone to do what they think is right before God is the option of freedom. Like those of you who want to wear a mask, I have no beef with you. But those of you who don't want to wear a mask, I also have no beef with you. That's why our churches should remain open to serve all of our congregations. Those that don't want to worship because they're too scared, and they want to love their neighbor as themselves, because there are people like that. Let's just be fair about this. There are people that are too scared to gather to worship right now. Maybe they fall in a risk category. Maybe there's another reason. I don't know. There are people like that. And then there are people that don't want to meet for worship because they think that's how they should love their neighbor. But then there are other people that want to meet for worship because that's how they think they should love their neighbor. Plus, they think God commanded it, and we shouldn't neglect the assembly, right? Like, the only way to serve both of those communities is to keep the church open. As it stands right now, your argument, Gospel Coalition, is basically this: let's not divide over this. And so in order to not divide over this, do everything the way I would do it. In fact, I'm going to call this the biblical way. And I'm sorry, that's just not it. Because I can make biblical cases that sound identical to yours about not wearing a mask. And so the only way to adjudicate between these two things is to consider this a matter of Christian freedom and to not despise those who wear a mask, but also to allow those who don't want to wear a mask to do what they think their duty before God is. That's the point here. That's the point here. Yeah, I'm kind of making a joke of it, using the word gospel as an adjective. I get it. But it's a serious point. Stay freaking open and allow freedom when it comes to wearing a mask. That's the only way to serve your entire congregation, instead of insisting on your own way, which the Bible specifically says that's not what love does, especially in matters of freedom. In matters of freedom, love does not insist on its own way. So allow your congregation to do what they think is right before God in this situation, because as you've said, the information that we're getting is conflicting, and you don't know how this is really working, because you've admitted in this article really nobody does. And so allow it as a matter of Christian freedom. Otherwise, what you're doing is saying, let's not divide, let's allow it as a matter of Christian freedom, plus everyone has to do it exactly the way I do it. And that is very much that's a contradictory kind of position, plus it's not what love does. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. God bless. And remember, gospel reasons are like biblical reasons, only way better.